Welcome to an audio Odyssey. The book of the same title was originally published a decade ago, and in the time since, much additional documentary evidence and information regarding Kiss in 1981 has been uncovered. Since a second edition of that book seems unlikely, I thought it would be an interesting and fun challenge to create an Elder Supercut, a multi-part audio documentary of sorts exploring varying facets of the Elder's genesis and era. The goal is to keep the assorted chapters concise and focused, and purposeful in both standalone and serialized contexts. In this episode, the transformation of the project following the unsatisfactory first recording sessions with producer Bob Ezrin at Toronto's Phase 1 Studios in May 1981.
We welcome our brother Morpheus.
By early June 1981, with at least 9 musically fleshed out songs completed, Kiss's 17th album recording process spun a 180-degree turn, or perhaps it was more of a 1260, leaving the participants dizzy and disoriented. On the face of it, it may have seemed a reasonable and promising state of affairs. After all, 9 was the minimum number of tracks contractually required to define an album per the 1980 contract with Phonogram Records, if Kiss were simply dialing it in. The problem was, the band were simply not excited by the results of their efforts, some of which still required lyrics. Eric later explained what became the standard press theme to explain the edited version. He told the Montreal Gazette early the following year, "We first went into the studio last January and recorded tracks that were powerful, but that sounded too much like the same old Kiss. We then went in last May with Ezrin in Toronto and came up with more good material. But it still seemed like an extension of the same image, and we wanted something radically different." Paul also explained the basis for the artistic shift to Entertainment Tonight.
The album's basically something that we wanted to do for a while, and what we tried to do with this album was kind of not follow formulas that we'd set for ourselves in the past, or try to break out of the restrictions that we've had before. Yep. We didn't want to do a heavy metal album just for the sake of having an album that sounds like the last Kiss album. After you've done 15 or 16... After you've done 15 or 16 albums, if you keep doing the same thing, it almost turns into a parody of itself. So this album sounds a little different than most of the things we've done before.
Well, what happened was certainly different. Gene Simmons told the Ultimate Classic Rock podcast in April 2025 about the genesis of The Elder. He recounted, "I was in Los Angeles at the Beverly Hills Hotel at the time. I thought I had an idea for a movie called The Elder. On hotel stationery, I started writing out a story. When the earth was young, they were already ancient, and so on. And in every age and every time, a hero is born." That kind of mythic fantasy quality. Ezrin happened to see my notes for The Elder, and he said, "Oh, I like this. How about we do a concept record where the songs mirror that?" I've edited out the conflated memories from that quote to retain the pertinent core information, and he explained the basic genesis in Kiss and Make Up and his growing infatuation with Hollywood. He was taking clumsy tentative steps and pitching unsolicited concept and ideas to those he could get meetings with, using his name recognition. Gene recounted in Kiss and Make Up,
"From those initial meetings in Hollywood, I came up with the idea for The Elder. I wasn't sure whether it would be a record or a movie. All I knew at first was a line that stuck in my head. When the earth was young, they were already old. I conceived of a race of immortal beings, energy-based beings, a takeoff of Marvel's Watcher. These beings were more observers than participants. They didn't interfere with human choice, and as a result, people were ultimately responsible for their own deeds, good and bad. The more I worked on it, the more I thought this would be a strong movie pitch."
Some have described the concept as kindergarten-level sci-fi narrative, but whatever the subjective appraisal, it was enough of a seed to plant. It was the something the group needed at the time. With the album celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2021, Paul Stanley observed in hindsight for a piece for Yahoo Music, "We were lost, we were delusional. We had become complacent and kind of ungrateful for the success that we had and what it was based on, so we were lazy, and I think we had all become very comfortable in a rich, so to speak, lifestyle, and become more concerned with how our contemporaries viewed us rather than our fans. And I think our fans were forsaken. We couldn't make a rock album. We had no teeth." Bob Ezrin recounted to Michael Brandvold,
"It was at a time when the band was in upheaval. It was certainly not at one of the better periods of my life. I was like, I was out of my mind.
And yet, as we know from the group's efforts to record, that they hadn't been entirely unsuccessful. It was simply a matter that they weren't enthusiastic about what they'd thus far created. The party line was initially set in 1981, as Paul detailed to hit paraders Charlie Crespo at the time. He noted, "I think the initial concept of the Elder may have come from Gene. What it became was quite different. True and truer." Gene continued to explain the genesis of the Elder to Yahoo Music. "It started with a story treatment that I wanted to turn into a movie. A Tolkien-esque kind of thing, with inspiration from The Watcher and Marvel and so on. Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, J.R.R. Tolkien might take offense at that. To be fair, it was little more than a plot synopsis painted with broad strokes at that point, infused more than slightly with a simply biblical mythological hodgepodge of ideas and concepts." One early concept noted, "Until man learns names of religions, gods and saints are not important, nor are all the languages. The message is simple, love thy neighbor as thyself. However, there are others who do not follow the way. Beware." Also, not to be pedantic, the initial line was,
They were already old when the earth was young.
Gene based his initial ideas on what seems like raw word association. The Elder were associated with hypnosis, clairvoyance, telepathy, but they were also versed in the mystical arts. They were healers. It was similar to some of his songwriting, a blender of ideas combined, perhaps at the end spitting out something that would stick to the walls and perhaps make some kind of sense. In those initial notes, he sketched out the Elder as keepers of a secret knowledge. Those beings use their mind in ways similar to the Jedi of Star Wars lore. Regular humanity was vulgar, ignorant, and lost, but a few special people learned that there were a dying race of beings, a superior intelligence predating them. While the Elder were superior, they were fading, almost echoing elements of Superman. But the curious among men have to become worthy of learning those mystical secrets. Gene suggested that they were arrogant, thinking themselves the only intelligence in the cosmos or on the planet. At the birth of the planet, they existed as energy. As the Earth cooled, the Elder started to take form, and when man emerged, they took the form of man in order to walk among them. Gene linked the Elder with a general worldwide theme of cultures that respect your elders. That would become a potential song title. Gene explained the general story to Entertainment Tonight in December 1981.
It's a story with songs taken from that story, and without getting too deeply wrapped up in it, it's about a boy, a very special boy.
Hi, Mom. Oh boy, a very special boy.
And he tried to add that the Elder,
And about a benign ancient order who have chosen him for what task we don't know yet.
Benign tumor.
A threemer, I think is what.
initially the setting of the story was in England, where an Oxford professor of realism, a seeker of knowledge who tries to explain away everything, only finds a lot of questions. It was almost laughably predictable. After discovering the secret of the Elder, the professor heads off to Stonehenge to try and find out the truth, and a student follows him.
I'm just trying to find the Elder. Has anybody seen the Elder? Please, where's that confounded Elder?
The last Elder is found, and he shares with the professor that the Elder have stayed hidden because of man's violence.
I knew you would come. My strength has left me.
Who are you?
The last of 3 brothers who swore an oath.
He reveals that they have left records for different people in different languages that all say the same thing. What is it? Well, the initial scrawl is rather nonsensical, but the fans of This Is Spinal Tap can take heart at the mention of Stonehenge. Hopefully Gene got the scale of the monument right. Actually, to be fair, Gene may have simply been ahead of his time. It didn't seem to take much to start fleshing out the idea, and it quickly started to take on a more mythological guise. Telling Michael Brandvold, Bob Ezrin explained,
We sat down and said, the band wants to make a change and they want to do something important and they want to do something different. Although they didn't start off honestly wanting to do like a project like this. Right. I have no concept. I talked them into it. I take full responsibility. I talked them into it. But then, of course, it wasn't like I was talking to a reluctant audience here. They jumped right in with both feet. I mean, Gene loved the idea.
Yet even then, the story lacked one critical element, a coherent setting.
The Elder. The story of the boy who stumbled on one of nature's closely guarded secrets and found not only a benign ancient order, but the key to his own destiny. When the earth was young, they were already old. The Elder are and always have been the guardians of mankind. In the universe of duality, as in all things, for any force to exist, there must be an equal and opposite force. And so it is with the eternal conflict between good and evil. In every age, in every place, a hero is chosen to right the wrong, to fight the evil. Those who worship evil exist solely to cause chaos and destruction. They revel in disorder. This then is our story, of the boy, the eternal order of the rose, and of the approaching malevolent horde who worship evil. This is the story of the Elder.
That treatment almost sounds like a trailer, with the sins of AI voicings utilized. Broadly defined are the Elder, the boy, and the antagonist. We get both the general theme and the simplistic conflict definition. Good versus bad. It's not clear what the timeline is for Gene's creative process, or at what point Bob Ezrin saw the idea, or what that idea really was. Gene later told Charlie Crespo, it was Bob Ezrin who said, let's do a concept record. Gene, I like your story, let's craft the songs based on your story. Again, it was something, it was anything. They needed something to get invested in order to record the obligated album, and excuses for facilitating a delay could not move the deadline. It was inevitable. Kiss owed Phonogram a record in 1981. So Bob watered that seed, and the idea took root, and the idea certainly developed from Gene's basic foundation. That is the reality of the Elder. Bob Ezrin told Michael Brandvold,
but then we said that we got this concept. I got this concept. I'm sorry, I was in the concept, and by then, everybody'd been touting all of like so-called concept work. I'd done all these concept records. We really weren't, in a story sense, concepts. They were built around an idea that I wanted to put forward, or a vision that I had for where I thought a band would go, or a sense that I thought that a show should have, or something like that. Not really a beginning to end story concept. This was one where it was really a story. And of course, I caught these guys at a fairly vulnerable point in their career, where they were searching for something and they needed a breakthrough. They wanted to get out of the makeup. Gene was toying with movies, and Paul always had aspirations to something higher than rock and so on. And I guess we all just sort of started drinking our own bathwater, unfortunately.
Gene also recounted in Kiss and Make Up.
When Bob Ezrin read my short story, he said, well, this is great. We should do a concept record about your short story. Ezrin made this announcement to the band and said we were going to try to make all of our songs fit around this one central idea. We put all the songs in the pot and got busy rewriting some lyrics, and soon enough, we had a rough storyline. The work went quickly because we knew what we wanted, our own Tommy.
Pete Townsend smashed a guitar. Bob Ezrin later told Ken Sharp for Behind the Mask, Gene had this story in mind, but the development of the story was very much a collaboration. The idea to make an album out of this story and make a stage show and all that other stuff was something he had to really be pushed into. Gene disagreed with having been pushed, taking full blame for the Elder's dalliance. I really believed in the vision, he recounted. I always dabbled in Hollywood anyway. I wrote this short story and I wanted to make it into a film. Ezrin said it was a great idea for a concept record. So when he held up a mirror to my face, poor delusional Gene really bought it, hook, line, and sinker. I'm going, yeah, I am great. Paul again recounts a slightly different scenario in Face the Music.
Bob entered the picture and he floated the idea of a concept album, which really came out of left field. Gene quickly bought into it and came up with a generic, vague, typical concept. It was about a kid who was the chosen one. Bill got behind the idea too. It would be our attempt to woo the critics. Let's put out an album that makes a statement, he told us. One that shows everybody how talented you are.
While the memories vary, the central premise with two key factors remain. Not only was the concept the only seeming way to get the band members invested in recording an album, a challenge had been thrown down that it could be a way of thumbing their noses at those who had never taken them seriously musically. Kill two birds with one stone. A revenge on the critics may have been more appealing and a motivating factor. We'll show you.
All of you chumps are gonna bow. All of you. I'm gonna show you how great I am.
With the Elder, Kiss would become a serious creative force, and the resulting album would be an artistic statement in the face of those critics. No longer would they be pandering to a kiddie audience, now they'd be pandering to the critics. And like Star Wars had proven, if an Elder film did materialize, then there would be more than enough commercial opportunities for Kiss-branded toys and spin-offs. You could almost taste the potential licensing cash. For Paul, Bob had always been seen as the band's guru, and he was going to come in and save them. He told Yahoo Music. We all just jumped on this idea of, well, we'll show the people. We'll show them how smart and musical we are. That really came from going, well, we can't at the moment, we can't rock. Quite honestly, I think we're all hoping to do something great, and when you fail, and you fall off 8-inch heels, you fall hard. Bill Aucoin also recounted to Ken Sharp. For some reason, because Bob's very bright, we got into this mythological thing, and it got way out of line. In truth, everyone was off the wall. There was no one who was going to fight it at that point, because at least we were going to get the album done. Clearly, the idea rejuvenated the group's creative juices. Later that year, Paul told Billboard's Roman Kozak, "We sat around for 6 to 8 hours a day, and we would talk and take notes before we even thought about picking up an instrument." The story drove the songs. Clearly there was impetus, and clearly the goal was multifold. For Paul in Face the Music, hindsight was again 20/20. With that X-ray vision, he brutally evaluated that decision.
Trying to show people how talented and bright you are is the best way to make an idiot of yourself, and we ended up doing that with flying colors. Looking back, we wanted peer acceptance and critical approval, and lost sight of the fact that none of that had mattered to us in the beginning. The people who so vehemently disliked us were more tied up in their own issues than in what kind of music we were making. The fact that the dislike and distaste was so pronounced, almost obsessive, throughout our career should have been a clue that it had little to do with us. If people wanted to waste their time wringing their hands over how much they hated my band, that was pathetic. What may have been more pathetic was that we tried to overcome it by pandering to those people. But we were clueless and decided to try to elevate ourselves, to separate ourselves from where we had started. We assured ourselves that we would impress a lot of people. Finally, we would make an album that garnered critical acclaim, our masterpiece.
My lord, I rest my case.
I sentence you to be exposed before your peers!
Bob Ezrin recounted to Michael Brandvold.
And actually, to this day, I think the story of the Elder is a great one. You don't really get it off the album, but we have a script that Gene and I wrote for this concept called the Elder, which I thought, and still do think, is a really cool, sort of weird science fiction kind of movie. Would have been a better movie than it was a record. Much better.
It's useful to recall C.K. Lent's analysis of the situation. He appraised, the group was moping about how dissatisfied they were with the tracks, and then the super Kiss thinking started to creep back in. Bill and Kiss came to believe that what Kiss definitely did not need was another traditional hard-rocking Kiss album. That was old hat. They had done those kinds of albums in the past. A major career move was called for. The next album would have to be important. To show the world Kiss was a talented group and capable of producing a stellar record. This album would pull them out of the rut the image of the overtly silly superhero comic book fantasy characters had got them into. They wanted to be perceived as artists. At the same time, the album would have to be super in scope and execution. Again, Gene, from Kiss and Make Up.
This was the first Kiss project where someone, in this case Bob Ezrin, talked the band members into the notion that credibility and respect from critics are as important as the love of the fans. As a result, it was a very serious record for us.
But the reality of 1981 was they had to get that album done. Kiss had a lucrative record deal with Phonogram and an obligation to meet. An album was going to be delivered whether it had to be dragged kicking and screaming from their collective creativity. The decision to go all in with Gene's idea and expand it via Bob's creative genius was the delusional clutching at straws, but they were committed 100% to the folly. And to fully and heinously mix one's metaphors, the Elder was the straw that broke the camel's back. June the 12th, 1981.
A date which will live in infamy
the date that Kiss had committed going all in on a risky gamble. Embracing hubris and tempting fate, Gene's idea was expanded with the help of Bob Ezrin to provide a framework for the recording sessions. And the collaboration soon transformed the characters and plot into something around which general song themes could be constructed. Songs were loosely associated with plot themes, or core plot points, and several new songwriters were brought into the band circle to assist with the material. Finally, Kiss had found the structure and purpose that they needed, or at least one that would let them accomplish the goal of delivering an album. Subjectively speaking, the Elder's starting point wasn't as bad as the hodgepodge of partial ideas available to Bob Ezrin in 1975, and from that mess, with only a couple of golden threads showing potential, what he had woven spoke volumes about his potential, at least the 1975 version of Bob. The Elder wasn't wholly a result of delusion. At its core, it was the result of desperation, and perhaps a pinch of delusional trust. But it's also impossible not to note how bravely Kiss approached the concept album, and how exquisitely recorded it was by Bob Ezrin and his assortment of engineers. But clearly, Gene was no Roger Waters. One work-in-progress summary suggested a setting emerging from the mists of confusion.
In the universe of duality, anything that exists must have an existing opposite. Thus, when our world was born, it held two opposite forces, the force of goodness and knowledge, and the force of evil and ignorance. The force of goodness has been embodied since time began by a group of ancients called the Elder. The Elder was here before the world was born, and will be here long after it dies. When man was created, the Elder assumed his form so they could live among him and better protect him from the force of evil. In every age and every place, the evil force unleashes a monster whose sole purpose is to destroy. The Elder does not fight man's battles for him, but selects from the throng certain men who are trained to slay the monsters and so become the heroes of mankind. We cannot perceive the Elder, and those selected do not know that they have been trained until the heroic deed is done. But all the stories of heroes that have come down to us through the ages are a result of the Elder's protection. It is the Elder's guardianship that allows mankind and the world to endure. The Elder will be with us for as long as there is evil in the world. In the years that lie before us, the battle between the two forces will take place in the political arena. Once again, the Elder will select a young man, this time an orphan boy, who will be unknowingly trained by an Elder in the guise of caretaker of the orphanage. It will be this boy's task to rescue a world leader being held hostage by men in league with the force of evil and ignorance. This boy will save our world, and his story will become part of the chronicles of heroism written on the wind by the Elder.
So by that time, the Elder had become a mix of mythological and the modern, wizards, watchers, and world leaders, politicians. In the realm of fantasy, it certainly wasn't too odd to blend these ideas and concept. Stephen R. Donaldson certainly had proven that with his work. None of these theme or plot ideas should be confused with the separate screenplay written by Russell and Jeffrey Marks. That's an entirely different matter, best left to the dedicated chapter in the Odyssey book.
When the earth was young, they were already old. The Elder is a council of ageless beings who embody the goodness and wisdom of the universe. Before the dawn of man, they protected and preserved the earth and all its inhabitants. When man appeared, the Elder assumed his form in order to guide him more closely. They are the caretakers, the guardians of mankind. In the dual nature of our universe, everything that exists has an existing opposite. Since the beginning of time, a force opposite to the Elder has existed, the force of evil and ignorance. Its purpose is to destroy mankind. In every age and every place, the Elder protects us by selecting and training heroes to fight those in league with the force of evil. As the clouds of darkness gather in our time, a boy is chosen. He does not know that he has already been accepted into the Elder's Order of the Rose, and that Morpheus has already begun training him. The Odyssey begins.
Join me for the next episode of Audio Odyssey, where we'll explore the recording of Kiss's music from the Elder and the songs considered for use or specifically written for that project. Should you wish to revisit the story treatment that had been created in time for the recording of the album, please reference Chapter 5 of the Audio Odyssey.
And we came up with an idea, hopefully, that would help us and get us through this problem. And the idea was to do a concept album. That concept album turned out to be The Elder. Now, the Elder was done helter-skelter. It was really a rough one to do. It was not easy in any respects.